Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest of our FrenchEntrée webinars. My name is Zoe Smith. I'm digital editor of FrenchEntrée, and I'm joined today by Richard Hammond from French Connections HCB and Fabien Pelissier from FAB French Insurance. Today's webinar is the latest in our Moving to France series, and we're going to be focusing on French visas, residency, and health insurance. So if you're a non-EU citizen looking to move to or retire to France, then this webinar is for you. For those of you that aren't familiar with FrenchEntrée, we're part of the France Media Group, who are specialist publishers covering all aspects of French life and culture, from travel to gastronomy to buying property. FrenchEntrée itself has been a leading resource for French property buyers for 20 years now. In fact, 2023 is our 20th anniversary. And not only do we help buyers to find their dream properties in France, we also help and advise with every aspect of the property buying and moving to France journey. Now, if you are looking to buy a property in France, you may also be interested in our French Property News magazine, which you can subscribe to over on the FrenchEntrée website. You can also buy our full range of magazines, gift cards, and our newly released 2024 France calendar at francemedia.shop. For those of you who are based in the UK, I'm also excited to announce that FrenchEntrée and France Media Group will once again be hosting the French Property Exhibition, which will be held in London on the 27th and 28th of January 2024. This is a really great opportunity to come and meet us all in person, to browse thousands of French properties and attend seminars from a wide range of industry leaders and experts. Both of today's panelists will also be there, and we'll have experts covering subjects from buying property, tax, legal and mortgages, to visas, healthcare, currency exchange, and much, much more. Entry is free, and you can register for tickets on FrenchEntrée.com or FrenchPropertyExhibition.com. Okay, so let's jump into today's French visas webinar. As I mentioned a moment ago, I'm joined today by Richard, owner and managing director of French Connections HCB, who are bilingual relocation specialists and experts in French visa and residency applications. I'm also joined by Fabien, founder and managing director of FAB French Insurance, who are independent insurance brokers offering bilingual services and, most importantly, health insurance policies that meet the requirements for French long-stay visas. Richard and Fabien, if I could ask you both to please turn your cameras on now and come join us.
Hi there, Zoe.
There they are. Big thank you to both of you for giving up your time to be with us today. Right, we're aiming for a run time of around 90 minutes today, and I'm going to put as many of your questions as possible to Richard and Fabien. A quick disclaimer before we get started. It is important to remember that all visa applications are considered on an individual basis by the French Immigration Department, so there are no guarantees that your visa application will be approved. The point of today's webinar is to help you understand the rules, the application process, and the eligibility criteria to maximize your chances of getting the French visa that you need. And if you do want the peace of mind of having an expert like Richard or Fabien handle your visa application or your health insurance policy, then you can use that contact form to get in touch with them. And do make sure you use the link that we send out, as they've also put together a special discount for anyone watching this webinar. Okay, well, let's kick things off by meeting both of our experts. Let's go over to Richard first, if you'd like to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about French Connections HCB.
Yeah, hi Zoe, and thank you so much for having us back. Hello everybody, and thank you for joining today. So French Connections HCB is really born from the concept of me being British, as you can hear, but also being French, because I was born in France and raised in France and had to help my parents mainly from a very young age. And I realized that there was a need probably 12, 13 years ago for this service. I have no excuse. It was just lack of courage and ambition to not launch the company 12 years ago. But 5 years ago, when I returned to France as an English speaker, I identified a need. I quickly met up with Fabien, and the rest is history. Today, we are the leading relocation specialist for France. We have offices now recently in America, in the UK, and in the southwest of France, where I'm joining you today. We help from sort of every aspect of relocation. Specifically today, we're going to be talking about visas, but we also have some pretty cool packages that we've been launching, including rental properties and car rentals. So yeah, every need that you might have to make your transition to France easy is what we aim to do. And we work hand in hand, of course, with Fabien here today.
Brilliant. Thanks, Richard. Well, let's go to Fabien whilst we're talking about it and let him introduce himself and FAB French Insurance.
Sure. Thank you, Zoe. Well, Richard did a very good introduction. We've been working together since, I don't know, it's like more than 5 years, I think it's been already. Time flies by. So we're the busiest broker in France, helping the English-speaking community. So in France, whatever, for visa applications, obviously insurance policies that are compliant with this, but also, the boring stuff like car insurance, properties, and all that thing. And we've been doing that for almost 10 years now. Obviously, Brexit changed things a bit, but the goal, we've been working with Richard more and more, especially over the past couple of years. And the goal is to make sure you can move across as simply as Frenchly possible.
Thanks to both of you and welcome back. So I wanted to start this webinar by just recapping a little bit of the basics that we covered in our last webinar with Richard and Fab. So the first webinar that we did together was really comprehensive and we covered a lot of ground. So I really encourage people to go back and watch that. And we'll pop the link to that in the chat box right now. It's also on our YouTube page, so it should be quite easy to find if you go over there and search for it. So in case there's anyone who's watching this who is completely new to the French visa process, here's a very quick breakdown of the core details. And I'm sure Richard or Fab will correct me if I make any mistakes here. So firstly, anyone who's moving to France who's a non-EU citizen will need some kind of visa. Typically, this is a 12-month long stay visa, although there are some other routes. And you generally apply for this in your home country or country of residence before you come to France. Most important thing about these long stay visas is that there are many different types of visa. For example, a visitor visa, which doesn't allow you to work, and various types of work and business visas that do allow you to work, along with study visas and other kinds of visas, which I won't get into all of that now. But the point is it's essential that you apply for the right type of visa and that you meet the requirements for that visa type. And we'll look at some of these in a bit more detail later. Now, the biggest question everyone asks is about the requirements for these visas. So what documentation do you need to provide, etc. We will again be looking at this in more detail at how the application process actually works today. But you will undoubtedly hear Richard talking about what he calls the 3 pillars of visa applications. So these are the 3 crucial requirements that you must meet to have your visa application approved. Number 1, that you have sufficient means to support yourself. So this means having roughly the equivalent income or savings to French minimum wage. This can vary if you're a married couple or you own a property, etc. But the key thing is that you can prove that you can support yourself. Number 2 is that you have somewhere safe to live. So the important thing here is that this does need to be a long-term solution. So it's not just enough to book an Airbnb for a few weeks. And we'll likely get into this again a bit more later. And then the third one is that you have healthcare coverage. Fabien went into great detail on this in our past webinar. But the most important thing to note is that you will need a specific policy that meets the requirements of the visa application. So regular travel insurance or even a lot of private international healthcare insurances won't be sufficient for this. Okay, so I hope I've got all that right. They're the 3 pillars of the visa requirements. But what I'm most interested in today is getting a bit more of an insight into how all this works in practice. And having chatted with Richard and Fab behind the scenes a little bit, it appears that quite a lot has changed since we last spoke. So I wanted to just start with that. So maybe, Richard, you could start us off and just let us know what's the current situation regarding visa applications and what's changed since we last spoke.
Yeah, thank you, Zoe, and thank you. I know I loved that my 3 pillars is now being used as an international reference. So thanks for that. I should do a copyright. So absolutely. I think what we covered in the last webinar and what you guys are probably used to seeing me and Fabien as a duo all over the web and the many live shows across the world these days. Yeah, things evolve. A word that I'm going to pinch from Fabien is, of course, visas are usually political tools. So depending on politics and given time, things change. We're privy to probably 5 full relocations per week here at French Connections these days. So that's usually couples moving from all over the world. And so we we're at the forefront of this. So yeah, we get an awful lot of feedback. I personally ask all of my clients to give me a debrief of what happened on the days of their appointment. So I hope that I can bring to you guys a lot of positive stuff as well today, because there's an awful lot of fear mongering and unknown. So I hope that I can give this for you guys today, and thinking about moving to France, which is such a wonderful country. And definitely, the aim eventually for me and Fabien is not just giving you a taste of what we do, but also, encourage you to do so. So the major changes, to jump into things, are mainly to the fact of some rules are being tightened up. The volume of requests is higher than ever. For the first time ever, US people are moving in bigger numbers than people from the UK. So that's, hence why our opening of a US office is also to cater for the different time zones. But I have a particular connection with the USA, and it's always been a very close place to my heart, and to a lot of people in my team. So yeah, we essentially today have seen a big change and shift with new countries opening up for visa application processes as well, because COVID is suddenly kind of really been something that's been not resolved. I've got to be careful there, but yeah, that definitely now all visa centres are pretty much open. And for those that don't know it, not many of your applications will actually be held at the French embassy. Because of the volume of applications, the French government have chosen to subcontract these applications. So they filter them for them and then submit them to the consulates in whichever country you're living in. Because of these volumes, and because of these companies getting better at what they do as well over the course of time, especially for the UK, right? There's lots of more options that are available. You can pay for fast tracks, you can pay for all sorts of things, but essentially the rules have been tightened up. I think this is fair to say. And yeah, the two companies that really rule those applications have different ways of dealing with things, and they're all, as you mentioned in the disclaimer, done on an individual basis. But more to the point, we've seen for EU spouse visas, a different, so I know there's a lot of questions about EU spouse. A lot of Irish people suddenly emerged during Brexit. So yeah, there's been a lot of change around EU spouse. There's a lot of opportunity around investment visas, potentially on those that want to open gîtes and run gîtes in France. Remote working, we've had an awful lot of success with remote working applications, and I think we probably understand better than anyone today the exact specifications of what that means, because we've been subject to an awful lot of tough ones, trust me, over the last few months. And as Fabien does in his company, we provide a delivered goods or money back guarantee on all of our services. So I pride myself and I make sure that we do the absolute best to get that positive outcome. So it's really important for us as a company to always understand and be at the cutting edge of this. And the way that we do it is quite simply communicating with people that are doing it in the real world. And yeah, we've very successfully, Zara, I think today I got a huge thumbs up. I think we had 15 visa validations from the UK and 5 from the USA today. So they've all coming through before the end of the year. But delays are longer as well. So that's another thing. Delays of how long your passport's been held because of the volume of applicants is getting slightly longer all over the world. And just on that bit of info, before I forget to share this with you guys, depending on where you choose your center, it will always go back to the embassy in one specific place. So for instance, in the USA, you could be sitting your appointment in LA or San Francisco or New York, your passport is going to travel back to DC where the consulate are going to validate it. So there's going to be a delay just on postage. Same for people in the UK. If you apply in Manchester, well, your passport's going to have to travel back to London and then travel back to you. So there are further delays. So it is important to understand.
Does that mean that potentially somebody who had the option to travel to London might be able to speed up their application a bit?
Yes, but that depends how busy London is. And so, yeah, we've had, I would say on average at the moment, we've gone from about 2 weeks maximum to get hold of your passport after your appointment in the UK to about the same delay as for the US, 3 to 4 weeks. So that's pretty much it. Certain countries like Switzerland or China, for instance, you've got to apply directly to the embassy in certain cases. So that could actually be quicker. There are options if you're doing this on your own, when you're booking through the companies that provide these services of bookings, there are options to fast track. In my experience, I'm not sure that they actually do much, because you'll see they give a 30-day maximum turnaround, which is pretty much what it would be anyway. So, be careful of the fact that, I don't think there's much that we can do to speed up French admin. So plenty of preparation is key for all you guys watching.
So just to confirm that, if that they take your passport so you make the application initially online, and then that's at the interview where you go in to the visa center where they take your passport. Is that correct? Sure. And then it's a month from then that you would just
expect to get your passport back.
Process, that would be the month that you could.
And then you've got a 3-month period to go to France and validate your visa. So you've got a whole process of booking, going to the appointment, waiting for your passport, traveling to France and validating your visa. With our services, we look after everything for the client, but the client does typically have to go to an appointment at one of these centers. Although, since we last spoke, as I mentioned, I think as a bit of a scoop beforehand, there is an online platform that is available in certain cases, but it takes a lot longer at this stage. So it's not actually speeding things up right now, but the theory is in certain countries we will be able to have these online applications that would actually make it easier for those that don't want to have their passport held. They can actually just go to the centre to get it stamped. So there's a whole workaround all of these processes, as you can imagine, that have become more and more popular. I think it's fair to say also, Zoe, that the US market, the Canadian market, and the UK market, which are the most English speakers, of course, come into France, there's probably a lot more flexibility since COVID. So a lot of our clients, actually, Fabien will be testimony to this, a lot of our clients are a lot younger than they used to be, even potentially from the last time we had this video webinar, which means that policies are different for medical terms. But from our side, it's a lot more remote working or business visa orientated. So that's changed. Also, that's changed the dynamics. But there's another thing that I see a lot of comments coming on about the laxed rules for second homeowners, which is something that's new. I mean, bear in mind that this is going to take a long time to get out. There's some information that I think you can readily access through our newsletter or on our webpage. But that's also part of these changes. So the visa centers are busier. They're looking at solutions to reduce the amount of people in there and to speed the processes up, clearly, and to reduce the cost, I guess, for the French government as well.
Yeah, so this, if people don't know what we're talking about, there is this, well, you can probably explain it better than me, Richard, but there is a bit of talk at the moment about this potential visa for British second homeowners, if I have understood it correctly. But yeah, it's not a done deal.
It's not just British people. The good news is my beloved USA is already also concerned actually in this reform. But Fabien, who's far more involved in French political terms than myself, would be able to explain that this is not necessarily, this is a first stage, and it's far from being, awarded or accorded. So what we've done in our newsletter is put the most amount of information that we could have that's clear for everyone. There's potentially good news at the end of it, but it's still most probably for most of your viewers today that are considering permanently relocating, not really make much of a difference. But it would make sense that France embraces, people that are going to go and boost the economy in that terms and make it easier. I think the denotation here is there's a special relationship with Britain. There's potentially a special relationship with America, right? So this is where it probably will become quite a long, tiresome process. So if you're planning on applying for a visa, you're still going to need to apply for a visa right now, guys. And the good news is we pretty much know it like the back of our hand. Fabien has all the right policies for the applications, so we can get you to France pretty quick.
Okay, that's good to know. Right, well, let's go over to Fabien. What about on the health insurance front? What's changed in the last 6 months or so since we last spoke?
Well, things did change post-Brexit. But it was like mid-2021, so it's been a while. Since then, it's just that, as Richard was saying, it's just they've tightened. Actually, they keep on tightening up the rules. Although you may find people that would say, okay, well, I've used this and it was accepted, so I went through the cracks. So it can, we're talking about humans, not robots. So sometimes you might have been lucky, or they might not have spot that you have used an Airbnb, for example, as the address or something like that. Doesn't mean it is the way to go. So for medical insurance policies, it's pretty much the same. You need to have in and outpatient benefits up to 30K cover. Although, in London, for example, and in New York, they would expect 100,000. No reason. It's just this is what they want. Probably think they're posher in these places, So you also need something, but there are some undisclosed rules. I mean, they say that you need a policy without any kind of medical exclusions. But in some cases, they also know, as is typically French, they also know it's not possible if you're in your 60s or 70s. I mean, obviously, you've had something. There is something that's going to end up being excluded. And they're aware of that. But as long as it's not disclosed on the certificate of insurance, they'll be happy with it. So it's all a matter of finding a policy. And that's why we keep on referring these, whoever you end up working with, guys, make sure you work with people that know the drill. And even better, obviously, I'll say with the best, work with us. But work with people that can kind of guarantee the result. Well, the result is not possible, but if there is no result, then you'll get refunded, or they'll cancel the premium or void the service, whatever, or they'll reapply. But make sure they've battle tested their services with French visas, because, some policies, I don't know, like IMG in the US or Bupa in the UK, they do have some plans that are compatible. But so first, they're very expensive most of the time, and not all plans are compatible. So again, this is very, very, it's paramount importance that you work with people such as Richard and I, that have been through the process literally thousands of times and that knows the process. Otherwise, you may think you're in the green and end up being rejected. And actually, it could be like I don't want to be like a fearmonger. It's just the result of not doing things right. Best case scenario, you're lucky. Like average-ish scenario, you could just slip through the cracks, but they notice something. And so instead of a 12-month visa, they'll provide you with a 6-month visa. It's probably like catastrophic. Then you'll need to reapply and get back to the UK or to the US, Or worse, you may end up being rejected. But the layout of the certificate of insurance, it's dull, definitely, but this is important. The layout of the certificate is actually very important. So that's why it's super important that you work with people that have done this before, like not just once or twice, like really like thousands and hundreds of times.
I'll just jump in there to say I absolutely vouch for that, because I like to think I'm quite up to date on the rules. Obviously, at FrenchEntrée, we try to keep up to date with what's going on, but we're not actually making those applications all the time. And these two would always be my first go-to to get that up-to-date information, because you're actually doing it all the time, and it does make a big difference.
Thanks for the support, Zoe.
Thank you, Zoe.
And as Richard was pointing out as well, the rules keep on kind of evolving. Obviously, this is not like a 180 degrees turn that they're doing every day, but sometimes, there's slight changes. And again, some of the rules are either undisclosed or not very clear. Like, for example, you may come at the TLS Center or VFS in the US, and you're bringing all the documents with you, everything is fine. You have the certificate of insurance, all is in order. And you just discover on the spot that they also expect something called the proof of full payment, like the invoice, basically, for your insurance policy. And if you didn't bring that along, well, again, not being a scaremonger, because the fearmonger, because what they'll say is, okay, well, after the appointment, you have like 7 days or whatever to send us the document. Okay, it's hardly going to be a hard rejection. It's never going to happen. But again, this is going to be a roadblock anyway. And you don't want that to happen because maybe you're already very tight on scheduled or, so all that to say, this is really important to be working with people because on paper, and well, Richard was saying originally, I think this is very important. We're both born in France, we've been raised in France, and there is like a French way to do things. There is the thing as written on the paper, and there is actually what needs to be done in real life. Like, for example, when you go at the interview at the TLS center, you're excited. And actually, that's not a word you should say in French, but you're excited. And so you want to, you want to prove that you will not be a burden. So you tend to, tell them as much information as you want because you want to prove that, for example, you have sufficient means of income and sufficient savings, etc. So you're kind of tempted to show off, like all the assets you have, and actually you may end up in doing actually more wrong than good. Because they may, you have to consider the guy in front of you is probably going to be helpful. He wants to be helpful, but you might also be triggering the guy, like triggering him, like he doesn't know which box he should tick, or you've shown him information that sounds a bit suspicious from his perspective. He will not say anything, but you may end up with a 6-month visa instead. It doesn't happen very often. Again, not being a fearmonger because over more than 1,000 applications each year, it's happened like 2 or 3 times in my case. But this does happen.
Sorry to cut you off. Does that actually happen that somebody applies for a 12-month visa and then they're given a 6-month visa?
Not if they go through Richard. Never happened with that.
Of course.
But I've seen it twice, 2 or 3 times.
Completely true. But I've seen it very often these days. A lot of the questions that I've seen come through already are based on EU nationals that are married or married to an EU national. This is what's rejecting a 12 to a 6 at the moment, and if they're lucky, they get a 6. So I would have always said 12 months ago, for convenience, get yourself a 12-month long stay visa, even if you have an EU spouse, because the process in France can take quite a while, and you might need to travel. But recently, the TLS centers, not so much of the VFS centers in the US, but the TLS centers in the UK or around the globe, and that stretches all the way to China and to Australia. So they're the biggest agency. They've obviously been told as soon as there's an EU national partner, you don't give a visa, you tell them to go to France. And that's all very well and good, as long as that's accepted afterwards, and as long as it doesn't take more than 90 days, or that in this case, you haven't already spent your 90 days. And then you'd be stuck in France until your application went through. So they are refused quite often at the moment, and they're giving out 6 months ones instead because they might have my support. And I've got some lovely clients that are moving into one of my apartments actually in the next few weeks. It's exactly that case, Polish passport, English wife. And it's not even a reunification because the Polish husband hasn't gone to France yet. So actually, probably, if we looked into it, they might even be wrong. This is the whole thing. I think sometimes even the French government or the agent of the French government can get confused. The agent could get confused. You could end up with the wrong visa. The good news is you can reapply. I think the only thing that I would really not recommend is overstaying in France on your 90 days. So get the wrong visa, you can reapply, but if you overstay on your 90 days and you know that, and you don't have proof that you're doing something actively for that, that's not a great idea.
Does overstaying your 90 days affect your ability to apply for a long stay visa in the future?
Potentially. It's a grey area. On paper, probably yes, but in reality, maybe no. But the truth of the matter is that if you've done that and you weren't aware, then it's about being able to back that up and prove it. And again, you could be really lucky, Zoe. On the day you go in there, they're busy, they go quickly, they don't check your passport off. It's important to understand, I think, for all you guys watching, in the centers, they're very helpful. They will really make sure that they're trying to make sure that you've applied for the right type, so you're not wasting the consulate's time. Essentially, that's what eventually they're being contracted for. But they are very helpful. And as Fabien said, the biggest mistake is to overshare in a way. it's not so much oversharing because you're doing something wrong. It's just that you're giving that agent potentially far too much information, and he doesn't know or she doesn't know what to do with that. And they don't want to do something wrong, and end up with somebody that's, not paying taxes or not in the right context. And I think it's quite common that visas are rejected, but there's no need to panic. The only problem that we have, and we're as stressed as you guys when you contract us, is if you're on a very, very tight frame of time when you need your passport back because you're a business person and you're going to be traveling, or it's, you've got a relative that's sick and you need for them to come to join you in France, all these kind of things. And every day, unfortunately, we get those scenarios. And I'd love to say that everybody contacts me 6 months before they move. In fact, even 12 months is a good time to contact us. We start, for most of our American clients, we might start 6-7 months on average before they actually plan to move. But to answer your question, yes, there is an awful lot of rejections, changes of types of visas, changes of applications on the day. So the reasons for the visa request are multiple, and one 12-month long stay visa with renewability can actually be applied for in different formats. I'm not going to bore you all with it today, but that's why doing this alone is quite daunting. And that's also why they're talking about this reform, because they are scared that second homeowners are going to be selling their properties and not returning to France. And so it would be a terrible shame, because we would love to be able to help you guys. And yes, we're not a free service, but I think overall we propose a really inclusive package. And for those certainly that are working, you would want to use our services, because you'll just save so much hassle. And plus, as we mentioned before, there's accountability, right? We're accountable for it. I think that the reason Fabien and I have grown to the size that we are today is because both Fabien and I really care. Genuinely, we really care about the situation. It affects us. We'll be stressed with the clients, with the members of staff that are doing it. And we want the successful outcome. At the end of the day, although we are big businesses these days, we are still, privately owned. And it affects us, all of these political reforms, all of the fact that people can't come, won't come, will choose not to buy. Of course, that will affect our business. And I think what we want to always do is be the hand that helps overall and find solutions. And as Fabien rightly said, I think we remind ourselves this quite often now these days. The reason we can find solutions is because quand je parle français, je suis vraiment français. And the fact of that is that being French, and that mentality, it's not sometimes the language, it's finding the solution. And quite often I would like to reassure everyone that thinks that France is this kind of bureaucratic nightmare. Within that, what's fantastic about, and it's okay as long as you're French, and so I can't complain, we built a business around this, but if you do ask people for help, they will help you. So I think the stage of the visa application often is done by a subcontracted company with a person of your nationality in your own country. So you're not going to get that assistance. You're not at the consulate. You're not speaking to a French person. But once you are in France, there's, we can talk to the French government, and they are humans and they're very old school. Although they've hidden themselves behind digital walls, we have the keys to open those doors. And we find an awful lot of solutions, but it's very challenging for sure.
Okay, well, whilst we're on the subject of visas being rejected, just to kind of round that topic up, what are some of the common reasons for being rejected? I mean, you mentioned obviously oversharing in the interview, but in terms of the actual application, what are the common things or common problems that people normally have?
Before Richard jumps in with all the admin-specific rejections, there is actually one, which is admin related as well, it's in insurance. Again, when people are applying or working with handholding companies like Richard, or immigration experts or lawyers, or when they're being assisted, that usually never happens. When they're doing that on their own, they very often source a policy that's non-compliant. And this is actually, again, when they do that on their own, the number one reason for rejections is actually the insurance policy. Because travel insurance will not cut it. Schengen insurance policies aren't compatible. If you have a policy with an excess, a deductible, a co-pay, co-insurance, whatever you name it, this is non-compliant. If there is a mention of medical exclusions, this will be rejected, etc. I mean, the list goes on and on. And
Yeah,
very
and just
often
to
they
remind
think they
you-
have something.
Sorry, but we did go through all of this in that last webinar. So do go and check that out, because Fabien goes through all of the details that need to be in the policy.
No,
and
but
quite a lot.
I can say it enough, because this is really, I mean, and sometimes you may have like a super comprehensive policy, but again, if it has just like a 50 euros excess, that's not going to cut it. And they don't care. I mean, even if that's like super compliant and comprehensive. So this is the problem. I won't go into more details. I've seen just quite a few questions about that, about the insurance, and then, once they're part of the French system, what happens afterwards. So we'll be talking about this, but just also one question about the premium. That's why I shared the link to our website. Just enter your age and you'll see the premium. The premium is obviously age dependent and related. But Richard probably has more insight about other common source of rejections, or things that might go wrong.
Yeah, sorry. So common sources of rejections are primarily I think Fabien is more confronted to the healthcare ones, because eventually, even if you've used my services, you will have used Fabien's, because our only provider is FAB Insurance. And so I don't get subject to any of them. I think in 4.5 years of working with you, Fabien, well done.
Wow.
I've very seldom, if I've had 3-4 complaints, that's all. And that was, because something, to be honest, it's nothing to do with health, visa insurance. It was car insurance, I think. And it was nothing, in fairness, really to do with Fabien. It's just the way that car insurance works in France. So I've never really been subject to health insurance problems. For me, it's more...
You touched on a subject that's very interesting, because it's also funny at the same time. In France, the thing is, I have a British friend who always says, you have to accept it. And the French system, that's the frustrating
I agree.
It does work. But there is, this is really French. If they expect something called the birth certificate or the no claim discount certificate, that's the word they asked for. And you provide them with a document that's not labeled exactly this way.
That's true.
They probably won't even read it, even if everything they require is in there. So this is something that you need to accept at some point.
It's so frustrating.
Yeah, I agree. I think
it works. It will go through eventually. It's just that, you need to provide them with whatever they expect. Exactly.
So come back to the rejections, though. I think for me, it's more not so much rejections, but an awful lot of EU spouse requests have been transformed into either 6-month visas or denied the application and been asked to go to France and apply for the EU spouse from France. What we have found in that context, because we were always trying to find solutions, right? That's what I always try to keep on striving for, is that it's actually quite a good thing to do is to register your EU spouse first and then do your EU spouse application. So even if you're an EU member, a passport holder, you have to let the French government know that you're living in France, because if you don't, your EU spouse application is probably going to be quite difficult to justify. Please feel free to get in touch with us for that, because we've become somewhat experts of those scenarios. Money, the way that your cash is presented. So, for instance, a lot of people have not presented their financial profile correctly. So the minimum wage that you mentioned, 1,389 euros, that's a net figure that they're looking for. So most of my clients moving have sold a house. So they've got cash in the bank, generally speaking, more than that 12. It's either that money each month or times 12 in an account. But the type of account where it's held, the way it's presented could be subject to questioning, including if you've got too many funds. So I had a client who, shout out to her if she's watching today, but who recently got told that she had too much money in her account and that there was no movements on the account, so that it was potentially just put there for her to apply for a visa. The visa was still accepted, but it put her in a really nervous situation. Yeah, good problem to have. Well done, Joe. But that particular case, it's actually her partner was a French diplomat. And this brings into a really intricate thing that actually being married to a French person is not as good as being married to an EU partner. I'm talking in visa request type, say, before anybody jumps on to the thing. But in terms of that, it's actually more difficult to being married to a French partner. So we've had an awful lot of cases where recently, shout out to Jack if he's watching, he was a client who's lived in the US all of his life, and he's British, or pretty much all his life. He's married to a French person. And it was his wife that reached out to me and said, oh, my husband is in the US. He's really stressed. He's tried to go through the visa application process there. He was denied even getting into the appointment. He's now sold his house in the US. He doesn't know what to do. And so we ended up getting Jack all the way back to the UK because he had a British passport, reapplying from there. Getting a reunification 12-month long stay visa so that he can then transform that into a Carte de Sejour. So all of these individual cases, sometimes it's not so much for me a denial, Zoe, it's just we need to take the file and reapply for something different or change the circumstances. Straight up denials I'll never actually have or see, because we essentially, quite a few of the questions is how much do we charge as a service? Well, the truth of the matter is we have a law team, so in-house, and so we kind of match to any international legal service, which is about, I would say, €2,000 per applicant, including taxes and translations. But we specialize more in the full package, so I think people will find value in what we do, because we provide a package for you to be able to not only apply for the visa, but get into the French healthcare system, get your tax returns done, and get all the way to your Carte de Sejour renewal, which we haven't mentioned yet, but that's the really difficult one, because that's in France, and that's with a French agent of the French state. And then you have to restart this process all again, and that happens 10 months after your visa's been issued. But coming back to the rejection, sorry, because I digress, I wouldn't really send the client, because of the warranties that we do, if we thought they were going to be denied. We wouldn't take the file on. So on our website, there's an eligibility test that you can do with us, and we'll tell you for a small fee, which is a credit towards the service, if you can or cannot, or if you are going to be eligible or not. Monetary wise, it's fine having money in savings. It's got to be an account which is fluid and transactional. It doesn't have to be a French bank account. It can just be money in savings. You are allowed to just be rich. Actually, France is, if you're just monetary rich, it's probably one of the best countries in the world, right? There's no tax on fortunes other than the actual IFI, so on real estate. But you can just not work. But you can also remote work on a long stay visa, as long as it is purely remote working. So digital nomads type visas actually are long stay visitor visas. You can divulge that to the French state. Are prerequisite conditions, which mean that you will continue to be paid in the country which you're working with. You can pay your social charges there. You must have your private medical cover, and you must do a tax return in France as well as in the country in which you're working. But of course, not many people understand that, but a 12-month long stay visa completely allows you to do that, as long as you don't engage into economic activity in France. And the reason I'm talking about that's my only reason for rejection, is when people talk about their work or what they're going to do, and the agent gives them the wrong, or says this is the wrong type of visa. Right. And so there's loads of solutions, one of which used to be the long stay and transform that into a working visa after 12 months if you open a gîte. But actually these days, Fabien and I recently have been working on quite a lot of platforms where people are creating businesses and investing through the house purchase into the investor's visa, which is €300,000 or more. So most of you guys could be considered investors if you're going to then open and run a gîte. So if you are planning to do that in the future, you could look at an investor visa, because most of you will qualify. Most of you are lucky enough to buy a property for more than €300,000 in France. And a lot of you might consider doing gîte rentals, weddings, seminars, events. So there are a lot of new ways of doing things that we've come across because we've been confronted to these situations, Zoe. But again, for me, the denial of a visa is really only solely based around the way that either income is presented or the talk about work and remote work potentially. With our service, there's a preparation call and there's a debrief before and after to understand what you're going to be saying, what to expect on the day. So what it actually feels like to go in the center. I think it seems silly, but a lot of my competitors,
really
or myself indeed, for many years had no idea really what was going on inside of the centers. And we didn't really ask this. We had our paralegal teams preparing documents saying all these are good and this is what you present and here everything is booked. But not many people would really know what it feels like to go in a centre. Why would we? I've got a French passport. I don't need to go into a visa centre, or I haven't needed to of late. So I think that's been something that we've really focused on, is being able to prepare people to what to expect. I think Fabien's got an awful lot, and I invite you to go back to that old webinar, because Fabien's information on the visa application healthcare has probably not changed all of that much since the last time, but most definitely from our point of view, we see a gradually evolving thing. So going to do this alone or going to do it with somebody that's specialized in just law is maybe actually going to be still quite a daunting thing, because I think the success of what we do is we also understand that this is a service, that you're coming to us for reassurance, that you're coming to us to get an overview of what to expect now and in the future, and that we are going to be able to find the solutions for that. And so the denial for me is a rare thing. But if it is a denial, again, we will propose people their money back, etc. But we'll also find a solution to what to do afterwards. So if they say, no, you've got to go to France, we'll just transfer that to your EU spouse for application. So it's not so much, we very seldom refund, we just transfer to another service.
Okay. Right. Let's jump into some of the live questions, because I do want to try and get through as many other. I think we've covered a lot of information already.
Sure.
Let me have a look. Right. Amanda says, we're ex-residents. We lived in France for 12 years. Does this give us any advantages for moving back to France?
No, not really. The process has changed. You've got to start again. As Fabien said, the excitement of maybe taking too much information beforehand or would be the only thing that would not help you. And in this context, unfortunately, you're just a passport holder. And don't forget that this 12-month visa, I just want to make sure, this 12-month visa or this 4-year talent passport visa, which are the only two that are renewable, and we talked about that last time, but they're not a big deal for the French government, right? They're not really. This is a big deal to you and to us, because it's stressful moments for all of us, because we want you to be successful. But they are temporary visas. They're not saying you can live there forever. So their actual request there at that time is not so much the interest of why you're moving to France, or if you lived there for 12 months before. It's, do you tick the 3 pillars that you mentioned, Zoe? And then, once you're in France, yes, of course, that might help to show that you're really, you're doing all of the admin, you can speak a minimum amount of French, and potentially one day they might introduce a French test, even for the Carte de Sejour.
Yeah, so I guess there's going to be advantages just for them moving to France, having already been through it, but perhaps not from the actual visa application point of view.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there you go, Amanda. But we can help with that.
There is one thing worth mentioning, because we're mentioning all the obvious rules, and this is something I think we didn't mention last time. It's very important. There are some rules, but this is also very typically French, that are mandatory but never checked. It doesn't make it any less mandatory. For example, I think the population of Ireland since Brexit has probably doubled, with all the British that found a relative in Ireland, and they've applied for an Irish passport or a German passport, or an EU passport basically, and many are coming to France, for example, through that passport. But it doesn't change the requirement. You still are supposed to be coming with having a safe place to live and having private medical insurance cover. And most people think that they can avoid that, because obviously with an EU passport, that they won't be double checking things at the border and things like that. But if you end up in an hospital and say, oh, okay, well, I just have a passport, but I have no cover in social security in Ireland because I've never been there. I'm just a passport holder. Then in a way you're an outlaw because you're supposed to be covered. It's because if you really were an EU citizen, then you'd be covered by that of an EU state. So this is kind of these undisclosed regulations. Well, actually they're disclosed, but it's just obviously no one's checking for that. No one's controlling or auditing that. So you think you can get away with it, and most will. But if anything happens, then you might be in trouble. So this is also something, that's why it's always worth having a conversation with an expert to make sure that everything's in check, because this is the kind of thing you probably don't even think about. You're like, okay, I have a new passport, everything is fine. Maybe not.
So this is for people who have EU citizenship, so they have an EU passport, but then they haven't necessarily been resident in the EU.
Yeah, but unless you can get a EU, medical European card,
right?
Like the former EIC and the no GIC, that's probably not going. They probably need something else. Well, it's not going to be crazy because it's the same requirement as with the visa, but still.
Well, actually, funnily enough, the next question that we had, which is from Neville, is on this sort of subject. So he says, my wife is Polish. Does she need a residency permit? And can I piggyback on her status as spouse? So I guess there's two things here. One is, as an EU citizen, if you come to France, do you actually need to apply for a residency permit? Or do you just show up? And then secondly, we mentioned it a little bit before, but perhaps you can go into a little bit more detail on what the process is now then for somebody coming along with their EU spouse.
So both are completely linked, actually. It's a very good analysis of whoever, I forget the name of the person that's written this question, but the truth of the matter is not many people know it, but we've been subject to it recently, and that we've noticed that this works well. So you can register with your local mairie as living permanently. That's a very quick thing. We can do that for EU citizens, and we've done it in the past for EU spouse applications. So first you register the EU member living in France, and then you start the application for the piggyback, which was mentioned, which is called an EU spouse visa. And the beauty of that is you get a 5-year carte de séjour straight away. The problem with that is sometimes the time, and so that you need to make sure you're going to do that. You don't need to leave France really for a period of, I would say, nearly 180 days, because there's probably quite a delay in that period of time. It doesn't mean you can't stay in France whilst the application is progressed. It just means that you wouldn't be able to leave and come back. So that's why I used to push for long stay visitor visas. Now they're not being allowed because there's probably too many requests. So anyhow, the short of it is actually, yes, not many people know it, but the EU member can actually ask for a carte de séjour de membre de ressortissant européen. So you can actually ask for, you can ask for, catchy one, yeah. So the CDC for an EU, that's the shortened version for an EU citizen. And that then is a really good step to then apply for the equivalent for the spouse. Because don't forget, this should be a reunification visa rather than a co-application. So the other one that you can pinch from me, Zoe, as on top of my pillars, is that I consider that the French government is like a bank, right? And the bank of the French government can only we've probably all applied for a mortgage or a loan, and your bank only takes certain documents. If you share a screenshot of your utility bill, it's not enough. It has to be the utility bill in the format that it was sent to you, right? Or it has to be your bank statements fully printed out with your address and name. Well, the French government, when they're processing data, if you bring them translated documents and things from other countries, well, this is just a French thing. It's like, wow, we don't really know this. This is a bit foreign. Maybe I'm being a bit kind of dramatic or caricatural over this, but I think it's true. But if you come with a French document, with a French address, with a French tax return, with a French driver's license, with everything else French, well, it's easy for them to process. They know these documents, and you're putting as much chance on your behalf. So whilst there is a double charge, which one of those things is not mandatory, as Fabien mentioned, considering your healthcare is really important here, because Fabien can also offer temporary solutions for EU members. Yeah, in theory, that's totally doable, but I would recommend starting with the EU national, registering them correctly, then starting that process and understanding that's going to take a little while. And if you're running short on your 90 days, apply for a 6-month visa, insist to get one, because at least then you can get your 6 months, you get 180 days time, which is usually plenty sufficient to get this done. And if you are going to use our services, reach out to us well before you leave the country, because we can actually start all of these processes before you start and enter France.
Okay, that's really good to know. Right, I had another couple, whilst we're on the subject of EU spouses and visas, I had a couple that were sent in advance. So I'm just going to see if, let me have a look. With the French, isn't it? Oh, I don't know if this is different. We sort of touched on this earlier. Amanda sent one in saying she's in an English civil partnership with a French citizen. She says she understands she's therefore entitled to a long stay visa, but she doesn't know which category of visa to apply for. So I guess there's two questions again. One is what type of visa? And the second one is how is it different when it's a French citizen that you're married to?
So yes, you're entitled to a reunification visa. So that's a 12-month long stay visa, which is important to mention, is proposed for one major reason. Me being a French national and my other half being British, but we arrived before Brexit, so she's okay. She's got a 10-year Carte de Sejour. But if she wanted to become, basically, she doesn't get an EU spouse Carte de Sejour. So this is the thing, which is kind of weird. It's better to be European in France, or easier to be European, married to a European, than it is to a French person. So if you do it from a French person's point of view, and you're married to a French person, you become automatically a citizen if you go down that route. But the citizenship comes with a language test. So a lot of people don't want to do that. And so the other option is to go for a long stay reunification visa, and then renew that long stay reunification visa into a Carte de Sejour after a period of 10 months.
Okay. And I had one more, which again, it was a French. So I think we've answered that. This is Aurora who sent this one in. She says she's married to a Frenchman. They live in the US, but own a house in France and plan to move to France next year. So I suppose for her, that would be the same process as for Amanda, because it's her husband is French.
Yes and no, because you could argue then that they're not reunifying unless Aurora's husband is not that yet there. So in that case, I mean, obviously I'm going to punt my own thing, come and contact me. But we are, I think, somewhat the specialists for US clients, and we do have an awful lot of experience on that. So
yeah, because she also, there's a two-part question. And the second part was that she has an 80-year-old mother who lives with them that they'd like to bring with her. So
yeah, really important to get that sorted beforehand. So contact us before. But yeah, in theory, just to answer a question, because I think it's lovely to be able to give free advice to people. You've got to cater for the fact that you do probably not want to apply for citizenship. So a long stay visitor visa is going to be required. Your husband doesn't really have to do anything. Although, as Fabien mentioned, well, he hasn't been in France for a long time, I'm guessing. So you might want to consider private medical insurance for everybody, because you're going to have to get him back into the French social system. It's all going to take time. So eventually, I think the thing is with all of these things, especially moving from the US, I'm not saying that moving from the UK is not difficult, but you guys are a drive away, a 1 hour flight. When you're moving from California, Colorado, Florida, it's a long way home, really, in a way. We have a lot of clients from New Zealand, Australia, etc. It's different time zones. It's a real nightmare to not have that assistance. And getting this key part nailed so that we've got the right application is really key. And specifically if you've got an elderly mother traveling with, because you don't want to have to send her back. And we've had the case of late where just to share this, this is not fear mongering, it's real life situations that probably you guys would like to hear, instead of a lawyer sat here saying to you, well, you can do this, you can't do that. A real life situation, I've got a lady that was in a retirement home. Her son is a French national, but she's
Oh, you just cut out there, Richard.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, you're back.
I'm still here. Yeah, no, so she's actually having to travel back to the UK to reapply for a long stay visa because they hadn't realised that really actually the citizenship thing was not going to be possible. So. Especially if you're French, in a way, you probably need more help than if you're married to a French person. You need more help for the visa front again, not necessarily for living with a French person.
We'll be careful cutting clips out.
Don't cut this out, right? It's okay because I can French match. I am French.
Okay, while we're on, this one's on a similar subject. I do fear that this question was one that was sent in advance again, and it's from Evelyn. I do fear it might be a little complicated to answer here, but she did sound quite desperate for advice. So if we could offer a little bit of general advice. So she says she's a British citizen, she's 76. She used to live in France up until 2018, and then she moved to Italy. She didn't get a Brexit withdrawal agreement card in Italy. And her son, who is a French citizen, is living in France. She's come to France and she wants to apply for a visa to stay in France. Her main question is really, does she need to leave and go back to the UK before starting this process? And she's a little worried because she's come into France from Italy and hasn't had a passport stamped, and she's not sure how that's going to work for going back to the UK.
So the answer is yes. Unfortunately, the only route for any non-EU national, including, of course, Britain these days, at this stage, at this moment in time, is going to be that you have to apply for through the embassy or through the agent in which you hold your passport or you're a citizen of. So if you were living in America and you held a British passport, you could choose either ones, but either country to apply. But in her case, she will have to travel back to the UK. The fact that the passports weren't stamped, probably not an issue, because that, as long as she can explain her situation, and again, it's very seldom picked up on. So I don't want to say that you definitely won't be asked a question, but it's not something that's really heavily looked upon. But yeah, steps would be book a long stay, book an appointment for a long stay renewable visitor visa, go to the UK, get your appointment done, wait for a couple of weeks. Now we know it's about 3 or 4 weeks, return to France, get your visa validated, and then you've got a 10-month wait till you can apply for your Carte de Sejour. The fact that your son is a French national or French citizen in this context doesn't really help unless you're dependent of him, so financially or forth. But to not overcomplicate things, I think probably sometimes the easiest way is to go down that route of long stay and then Carte de Sejour. And then in the future, if you want to become a citizen, of course, then there's a language test, there's all things, and there's a period of time you need to spend in France.
Okay, brilliant. Thank
you. And you'll need Fabien's help for private medical cover to apply for that long-stay visa.
Right, let me just find a question for Fab as well, so we don't leave him out. Here we go. Here's one that Steve sent in earlier. He says, we're going to retire to France from the UK in December next year. He says, I'll be in a receipt of a state pension at that point, but my wife will have to wait another year. His question is he able to apply for an S1 form? And also, what about his wife? Does she need healthcare coverage, or can she apply for her S1 in advance?
Yeah, sure. Well, I've answered a couple of questions about that as well on the chat, but yeah, it's best if everyone can hear it. So basically, the S1 program is a free out of jail card that you can use when it comes to medical, the private medical insurance thing. It also comes at a cost. At least it. Then you make an educated decision. But if you apply for the S1, you're also opting out from the NHS. So it's only an option for British expats. It doesn't work for American expats or other expats. It's actually one of the post-Brexit agreements. But so, and then if you want to get back into the NHS for whatever reason, or if during that first year you want to go back for some routine cares and whatever, then you're out of the NHS. You're basically like me if I were to go in the UK. Whereas the private medical insurance is only required for that first year. So the short answer to the question is, yes, you can apply for an S1. It means you don't have the requirement for private medical insurance. Your wife, if I got that correctly, so your wife can piggyback on your S1, but she will need the private medical insurance. She cannot dodge that bullet. Only you can. However, she'll be able to piggyback on your policy, well, the S1, very quickly. So usually it means you'll be granted access into the French social security system faster. Again, usually, to be taken with, well, in France, it's not with a pinch of salt, it's with buckets of salt. But
paperwork.
This is basically how it goes. But again, it's important to remember that you're forfeiting yourself from the NHS. So it's not something to be taken lightly, because if you want to get back to the UK eventually, or later on in life, then you need to reapply, and same process. You have to see that as a money pot. You've paid social taxes all your life. You've contributed to a money pot. And that money pot, that's what the S1 program is. That money pot that's in the UK right now is being transferred to France. So if you want to get back to the UK, then they need to transfer that pot back to the UK. It's exactly like me. If I were to go to the UK and want to relocate to the UK, which I won't do because I love France too much, but then my social taxes will then need to be transferred to the UK, which is kind of an S1 process of its own. So this is an important decision. And again, most of the time, private medical insurance, if it's really about the money, then I get it. But if it's not just about the money, then it's probably something to be, to wait in the decision process.
Yeah, it's really good advice. And I don't think people really think of it like that. Okay.
Also, you might just want to return to see your own dentist in Bath, or, anywhere in the lovely UK. But this is only for the Americans watching this, what the hell is an S1? An S1 is a medical thing for us British people. For you guys in the US, what is fantastic about private medical care for visas is it's so cheap. You'll think that usually the premium that Fabien will charge for a whole year is what you pay for 1 month in the US. Europe is going to seem extremely cheap. So I think when we see in the comments about costs, etc. So S1, I completely agree with Fabien, completely down to the cost. If you can afford it, if you have it and you can't afford really the private cover, and you don't want to, then it's a great option, right? It's afforded to you. You've paid for it all of your life to use it. It doesn't change anything for the visa application or what so forth. But the problem is it does temporarily at least cut you out of the NHS. And, there's an awful lot of people that just want to return and it takes a while for us to register you on the French systems as well. And usually the application. And the doctors as well, generally speaking.
Well, it depends through an S1 or not, but usually, you start the application process within the French social security. So, the NHS in France is called the CPAM. You cannot apply straight away. You need to wait for 90 days. And after 90 days, and actually you should apply as quickly as possible. But after 90 days, then you start the application process with CPAM, which usually, again, can vary massively, especially nowadays. They're quite busy, and it depends where you're in France as well. But usually, you'd be looking at a 6-month window, so 9 months total. It can be more. It can be much faster. But on average, I wouldn't count on it. I would rather consider like 9 months. Maybe Richard actually can confirm or deny the numbers. But and once you're part of the French social security system, you can forget about private medical insurance, and then you get to enjoy what basically all French natives and French citizens will have, which is the holy grail, what we call the mutuelle, which is top-up health insurance. And even dentistry will be for free. You will be provided with at least one quote that's free of charge. Whatever it's dentistry, root canal, a crown prosthesis, glasses, you will have an option for free every time. Then,
I think it's also, for me, it's just language based. I speak pretty much fluent Spanish, but I spent quite a while in the Spanish hospital when I was younger. And, the fact of being in that stressful condition, etc., and you're stuck in it, which is not your native language, I think is something to consider. So putting the cost and etc. to one side, the fact of still being able to reutilize the a national health service which you've paid in for all of those years, and still having that open to you without having to do anything and just one flight away, I think is what I would consider the most there. But the good news is, again, if you're American, it's going to be really cheap, and the service is great in France as well. So yeah, come to France.
Brilliant. Right, I've just seen the time, and I really wanted to talk about Carte de Sejour today. So to explain to anybody who doesn't know, the Carte de Sejour is essentially your residency permit for France. And that's what, when you come to France with a long stay visa and you renew that visa, you're actually not renewing your visa, you're applying for Carte de Sejour. I think I'm correct on that, but you can correct me if not, Richard. So can you talk us through what happens once you get to France? You've got your long stay visa. What happens now? How do I go about that next step of applying for the Carte de Sejour?
Yeah. So if you move with us, we will have a full inclusive package to do all of the admin tasks over the next 12 months, so that we bring you to the Carte de Séjour in the best possible conditions. And we only give you those money back or reapplication guarantees if you've followed the procedures, either done themselves or followed the procedures that we recommend, which are going to be registering for a tax code, doing a tax return, getting a driving license exchange if applicable, just doing everything possible to have French documents when you come to renew that Carte de Séjour. Entering the French medical system is also a big one. Fabien mentioned earlier about timeframes. But also what you've got to consider is that sometimes the prefectures, so these are the regional offices where you'll have your appointment, which the 3 pillars are similar to the first part of the application. But here, this is a French national working and enjoying his French area and potentially being disturbed by an awful lot of second homeowners, British people or expats that haven't followed the rules for a long while before Brexit and, have caught themselves up without tax codes and loads of things. And a lot of it is innocent, by the way. Just people thought that their taxe foncière or taxe d'habitation was their tax because they didn't work. For those that remote work as well, it's very key to say that remote working is totally allowed. There are some grey areas. So if you're working and you're your own director, or you're the director of your business and you are the business, then there's legitimacy of where you actually reside permanently. So there's rules, there's lots of stuff around that. And if you are considering remote working, please reach out to me, because I've become quite an expert on those areas, because more and more of my clients remote work, but also I have companies in several different countries, so I have to employ and know those rules. So I've paid loads of money for that kind of advice, and I can now share it with you guys. But in context, the application for the Carte de Séjour is the key one to prepare to its best, because if it's not successful, all that happens is you either get an extension until you can provide the documents, and that's usually where I'm saying the French are very understanding in a way. So you'll get an extension until you can correct your file. And where Fabien has also mentioned, they kind of make their own rules up. Well, this is kind of true. I think I joke about it. What are you going to do if they say no and you don't agree with them? Well, if you use our services, we'll be on the phone on the day. And in certain circumstances, you can ask somebody that speaks French to accompany you, although that's not always accepted. But they might just say, well, actually, we want you to have a social security number. And you say, well, I don't need one. I've got private medical coverage. And in theory, you're right. But if they say, no, we want you to have that, you can't really argue it.
If I can jump in on this one, because actually this is something not everybody... It
happens quite often at the moment.
Yeah, it's a mandatory... it's not optional. You need to be part of the French Social Security. People are asking, can I be covered? It's not a can. It's actually a need. You need to be part of the French Social Security. Once you've been in France for more than 6 months, you're supposed to be part or have started the process of application.
So before they were pretty laxist with it, now they're not. There's other things, they're looking out for second homeowners. You've got to understand that your Carte de Séjour, that process, my parents moved to France 39 years or 40 years ago. That was already in place before the kind of Schengen zone was put in place, etc. So it's a very old process. It's nothing to be that worried about. But what they're looking for here is French documents, proof of you being in France. So this is where I think Amanda asked earlier, we lived in France 12 years ago, we love France. This is when that might help. Letters from your mayor, proof that you are in France permanently. So for what we propose in our packages, which to answer many questions, how much does it cost per person? It's not really so much, we make a bespoke, tailor-made package, but this would include all of the visas, the Carte de Sejour, including getting into the French healthcare. I would say would be roughly around 5,000 euros per person, including taxes, etc. But that's spread over a 12-month period. We have payment plans, all the lovely things like money back and guarantees. But to answer the question about the Carte de Sejour, it will vary this from region to region quite dramatically. You might also not get your appointment straight away. So you might be overstaying on your visa before you set your appointment. Don't worry. They will issue you a document which actually does technically allow you to leave the Schengen zone, although we don't really recommend it. But technically speaking, they might actually just give you an extension because, you're in an area where there's an awful lot of expats. So if you're in Dordogne Shire or Brittany Shire, then there's lots of people renewing their visas to Carte de Séjour. You might have a delay, which means that you're going to be waiting. So nothing to worry about. But it does mean that you've got to make sure that you've got those documents in order. And if you have sold your property to move to France and now you've cashed low, and you haven't got any income, that's when you could be denied. So those that have come along with and spent, majority of their savings on their house and now have got a business and were badly advised to create a structure in France, and Fabien and I can talk to you all about that, having French businesses and multiple ones, each of us, employing people in France is extremely expensive. And so when you're a director of the business, you can't afford to pay yourself much money very often. So if you are a gîte business and your business plan doesn't actually allow you to earn minimum wage, your change of status, which would have been required because you first come as a visitor, you've then proposed to change your status. Because you spent your money on your house, you've no longer got the savings required. And therefore, you're going to have to prove to them that you're going to make minimum wage. That might be difficult. And you might have also bought a business in France and then realized that actually hitting minimum wage for you as a director is super hard. But on top of that, super expensive. It means that you're going to be paying about 2.5 times your net salary to pay yourself that figure because you're considered a director of a company. So your social charges and payment to the French state is higher than an employee. So these are the only cases, I think, where you've got to be particularly attentive when you apply in the first place. So reaching out to us way before you leave, talking through your business plans. Both Fabien and I think are extremely well versed in the world of business in France as well, because Fabien's very modest, but outside of this, he's helped an awful lot of businesses set up in France, etc. And I've learned the hard way and done it myself. But I think we've got 8 different businesses registered in France. But my point being is that it might also be worth talking with us because we might be able to say to you, well, actually, you were planning for this visa application, but based on your overall idea, or your situation, or you're remote working and you might be quitting your job and then you're going to do a gîte, we might come up with a solution which is more tailored to your needs, which enables you to actually be successful on the Carte de Séjour.
And actually, Richard has been quite modest as well when you mentioned the investor visa in France. I mean, if you want that kind of visa, apart from Richard, I don't think there is any single advisor out there that can do it. And same with other things. If you're American and want to drive basically with an American license because you're a second home owner, we do have solutions that I think as well are exclusive to France. So we do have unique solutions that we've created over the years that I think the competition is lacking way behind. And it's not to be bragging, it's really because I think we're the only ones that tried to understand the system in depth, whereas most of the time people are just selling a service. And we want you guys to move across. I think that's the difference.
Well, it's funny you mention driving licenses, because I had a really interesting question sent in, which I wanted to put to you two. So this one was from Grant. Grant, was it? Yes, Grant. So he said basically he's moved to France and he's exchanged his, I think he was a UK license holder, and he's exchanged it for a French permit. However, he says that his UK motorcycle license has not been carried across. Apparently, they changed the category A to a category A1, which I think is essentially a moped license, or and so he says he's queried ANTS on this, and that they replied that an A license has not been transferable since 2016, and he's entitled to an A2 license in France. But basically, they've said that the only way to do this is that he has this license for 2 years, and then he does a 7-hour training session to upgrade it to a full motorcycle license. Of course, he's a motorcyclist, so this is quite devastating news to him. Is this something that's been happening to other people? Is there any way around it? Is this just the law?
So it's a shame I can't turn around the camera over, so I've got a motorcycle in my office, actually. So I should be quite well placed to understand the pain that you must be feeling.
I thought you guys might know. Yes.
Yeah. So I guess, well, the short answer is probably to query the resolve of the ANTS is always difficult. We could look into it. It's a shame I don't have my colleagues. I've sent everybody home today because I didn't want any noise in the background. But Annabelle, who's my specialist on driving license exchange, would be the best place to answer that, or to look at your file. We'd be happy to do that free of charge, just to have a look at your actual situation. Please be aware that the laws are just weird sometimes. I mean, for Americans, again, you can't exchange some licenses. I mean, I can give you the list of the certain states in America are not transferable. Some are. Some are, like, I think South Carolina, you can transfer everything. If you're from Pennsylvania, you can only do car licenses. So it's really odd. And unfortunately, for a lot of countries, it's even more strict than just that. So I know you're not feeling that way because this feels like a bit of a downgrade, and why are they doing this? But it could be worse. They could be just saying to you, you've got to sit your test again. This is where Fabien mentioned for second homeowners, we've probably got a fairly unique solution for Americans or for UAE second homeowners, etc., that we work with that have got collections of cars and things like that and don't want to sit their test to be able to insure the cars. So we do have solutions, for instance, considering the purchases of the cars through businesses. But that again, that's probably best to reach out to us. We can put you through to my colleague Annabelle, who manages that, and we'll be happy to look at that for you.
We'll get him to get in touch.
I'm not sure we're going to give you the answer that you want.
Yeah,
really,
unfortunately, that sounds like
quite often the battle with
ants
is it's pretty tough.
Okay, right. We've only got 5 minutes left, so let's see if we can just race through a few live questions, and then we'll wrap this up. Let me see. Bettina says, "I'm applying for a long stay." Okay, she says she's applying for a long stay visa for next year. She'll be working remotely for a UK company while she's in France. Her question is, how does the tax work after 183 days? Where will she be tax liable? So it's a bit off the subject of visas, but...
Well, no, it isn't, because it's really key for your Carte de Sejour renewability. So for your Carte de Sejour, the Willy Wonka's golden ticket is a tax return.
I could quote you on that one as well.
Yes, you can. And so not many people know, but you can do a non-resident tax return and a residence tax return. Okay, so many people are scared of France because of taxes. I think I'm going to steal Fabien's one on this, but the richest man in the world actually lives in Paris. He's the director of LVMH, and he lives there full time. So that does mean that there are solutions around that. I don't think it's just his love of France. But the point being is that in France, there's dual taxation treaties with most English-speaking countries. In fact, with any countries where there's economic development, usually there's a dual taxation treaty. So whilst it is true that from January to December, if you spend more than 183 days, you automatically become a tax resident. You can have dual tax residency. In the case of anyone, whether you receive a pension, whether you do this, you're going to have to do a tax return. Whether you choose to do that tax return as a resident or non-resident is, one topic. It depends on how much time you spend in the country. But you could be made, so these are questions that often come to me, and so I have to have, an awful lot of knowledge on this topic. But I could be a business guy that lives in France permanently. This is my only home, but I travel a lot for work. So I spend less than 183 days. I'm like Bettina, I think, that works remotely. So I'm working remotely. I spend less than 183 days. My money is earned and my taxes are paid in the UK or the USA. But I would still be held to do a non-residence tax return, really, where I wouldn't be taxed. I'd just be telling the French government, I've earned $100,000 in the US or in the UK. Here's my tax return. It's all been paid. And I've earned zero money in France. Or if you've been renting out your room as a gîte, you've earned €1,000. So you'd only be taxed on the money that you've actually earned in France, and in this case, if it's remote working, that money wasn't earned in France. The rules of remote working are clear. You work for your company that has no economic interest in France. You remain an employee of that company. You remain paid in the account in the country in which you perceive your salary. You continue to declare taxes in that country. And you, on top of that, declare a resident or non-resident tax return in France, depending on the time spent in France. You're allowed to do that. The only times where this becomes a little bit of a grey area is if you are a director of your own company with no employees and you keep your company in the UK and you're living in France full time. And from an accountancy point of view, not from a visa law point of view, accountants would maybe say to you, that's not right because your legitimacy of space is where you are. So that wouldn't need to be done straight away, but you would want to consider that and change it over. But if you're just working for a UK business, let's take you're working for a company that's only exists in the UK, and you're still on that payroll, that's all good. You can stay on that long stay visa be renewed to a Carte de Sejour visa. That income would be considered for your renewal of your Carte de Sejour, and it would be best considered if it's on a tax return.
Okay. Yeah. So again, it keeps coming up time and time again about just planning and preparation and thinking, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps ahead. So that I think if there's one takeaway people take from today's webinar, it's probably that is if you're thinking of moving to France, get in touch now and have those conversations. Right. Let's do one last question and then we'll quickly wrap it up. This is an interesting one. This is for Fab from Anthony. He says, I worked in France in the 80s, received a small amount of state pension from the French government, and I have an active French social security number. So his question is, does this change anything as regards to health insurance? I assume he means if he moves back to France now.
Yeah, well, indeed, this is interesting because, as I said, unusual scenarios are actually a good one to be in. What France requires, basically, is the equivalent of Social Security plus a mutuelle. So usually when you apply for a visa, you don't have an active French social security number, and therefore you cannot have a mutuelle. That's why you need private medical insurance. But if you do have an active French social security number, you need to source a mutuelle that is at least what we call a mutuelle responsable, which is basically 100% santé compatible mutuelle. And that plus the active numbers will actually get you through as far as it comes to the requirement. And again, it's exactly the same if you apply for residency, because we talk about the policy for the visa application. But after the first year, so actually before the visa expires, you'll need to apply for residency. And part of the requirements as well at that stage for the residency permit will be to have private medical insurance or an active social security number and a mutuelle. So it's exactly the same. So yes, it does change things for him. In most scenarios, he can probably use that plus a mutuelle to get through, or instead of private medical insurance, which technically a mutuelle is private medical insurance, but we will not call it that in France.
Okay, interesting. Okay, right, we're going to have to wrap things up there now. We've run out of time. Thank you to everyone who's attended today, and a big thank you to Richard and Fabien for answering all these many, many questions. We'll try and get them back again in the future for another webinar soon. If you have any additional questions or you want to get in touch with French Connections HCB or FAB French Insurance, do look out for our follow-up email, which should be coming in the next day or two. That'll have all the details of how you can do that, including a special offer for everyone watching this webinar. If we didn't get around to your question today, we will make sure we forward them on to the relevant panelists. And if you have any additional questions or you want to get in touch with them, you can also email us at webinar@FrenchEntrée.com. If you enjoyed today's webinar, keep an eye out for more FrenchEntrée webinars over the coming months. Our last webinar of this year, which we'll be hosting next month, will be Buying and Owning a Second Home for Americans in France. You can sign up for that over on the FrenchEntrée website now. While you're there, don't forget to sign up for your free tickets to the French Property Exhibition this January in London. And finally, do let us know what you thought of today's webinar. Did you enjoy it? And what topics would you like it to see us cover in upcoming webinars? You can drop us an email at webinar@FrenchEntrée.com. Thank you once again to everyone for attending. And thank you one more time to Richard and Fabien. And I'll hopefully see you all soon on the next webinar.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.